When we talk about decision making, something that we have to understand is this: just because a door opens does not necessarily mean that God is the one that opened the door. Today we're going to talk about this subject, evaluating outcomes biblically. Not every open door came from God. That may surprise some people, because we often hear phrases like, well, the opportunity just appeared, the circumstances lined up, and it just worked out. The path became easier. And people assume ease automatically equals God's approval. And that's not always true. Sometimes a door opens because God provided it. And sometimes a door opens because life happened. And sometimes a door opens because temptation arrived wearing a disguise of an open door. That's why wisdom asks a very different question. Not, can I do this? Not, will this benefit me? Not, do I want this? But, what happens if I walk down this road? Because biblical wisdom looks beyond the moment and asks about the destination. It evaluates our outcomes. It examines fruit. It thinks farther ahead than just the now. Many people live by reaction. Scripture teaches people to live by discernment. Imagine standing at the edge of a river. You watch leaves floating down the stream one by one. They disappear around the bend. Now imagine somebody saying, there's a waterfall just beyond what you can see. Suddenly the entire situation changes. Why? Because information about the outcome changes the present decisions. You're not going to be somebody that's going to float down that river if there's a waterfall just around the bend. And life works that same way. Many decisions look harmless at the beginning. It's attractive, it's interesting, it's exciting, it's comfortable, but wisdom will ask, where does this eventually lead us to? Because direction matters, and small directions over time create large destinations. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 26 and 27 say, ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand or to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. Notice that word, ponder, think, consider, evaluate, measure. Slow down enough to examine the road. That is almost the opposite of what modern culture says. People are told, act quickly, trust your instinct, follow your heart. Yet Scripture repeatedly says, stop and think. Look farther ahead. Evaluate where this path is going to go. Years ago, a fisherman prepared to launch his boat out into the water, and the sky looked beautiful. There was calm water, clear horizon, no obvious problems. Everything seemed perfect. An older fisherman nearby looked upward and said, you may want to wait. The younger man laughed and said, there's not a cloud in the sky. I'm going to go out. But the older man had watched the weather patterns for decades, and he noticed signs of invisible things that took place that would sooner or later create issues. Pressures would change, winds would shift and things, and he would notice that. And that man went out on that boat that day, and the younger man, of course, and he went out into the water, and lo and behold, the wind began to shift. There would be subtle indicators of things, and later a violent storm got on that body of water. The younger fisherman barely made it back home. Experience recognized outcomes before circumstances could reveal them. That matters spiritually, because mature believers often see consequences younger believers might miss. That is why counsel matters very much. Not because older believers know everything, but because they have experience that sees farther than what maybe younger believers ever could. Proverbs 11, verse number 14 says, where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Safety. Protection. Guardrails. People often avoid counsel because they fear hearing things that they do not want to hear. Sometimes people already know what they want. They simply want agreement. They want something that will not basically give them correction. They want something that's just going to align with what they want. But truth is always going to be something that may be hard in the moment, but it will prevent long-term pain. Think about Lot. Lot looked towards the plains near Sodom. Scripture says they appeared beautiful. They were prosperous. They were pleasant. They were attractive. But listen carefully. Genesis 13 verses 10 and 11 say, "And Lot lifted up his eyes, and behold, all the plain of Jordan, that it was all well watered everywhere. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan." Notice the sequence. Lot saw, Lot chose. Outward appearance drove his decisions. Fields looked rich. Opportunities looked promising. The landscape looked ideal. But he failed to evaluate where the path ultimately led. Because eventually Sodom became disaster. His family suffered, his testimony suffered, his future suffered. Why? Because visible benefits blinded him to the spiritual consequences. And people still make the same mistake today. They ask how much money, how much success, how much opportunity, without asking, how will this affect my walk with God? How will this affect my family? How will this shape my spiritual life? Not every profitable thing is beneficial. Not every advancement is wise. Not every exciting possibility deserves a pursuit. Because Scripture evaluates success very differently than what we do. Mark 8 verse 36 says, "For what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" What a question. Jesus pulls back the curtain. Imagine gaining everything people dream about. Recognition, possessions, influence, status, power, money, you name it, you have it. But in the middle of all of that, as you gain it, you lose what matters the most, your soul. That's a terrible exchange. Yet people make trades like that constantly. There was a man who's offered a tremendous opportunity, higher salary, prestigious positions, bigger platform. People around him said, "Hey, you need to take it." But accepting would remove his family from a place where they had always grown up. Family members were already there. I mean, they had a good home life, good stability, good, I guess you could say, a community that was around them. For weeks, he wrestled with the decision going back and forth, and he eventually declined the position. People asked the question, "Why didn't you take it?" It was because I looked beyond the moment and I saw the effects it would have on things that really matter. And can I say that's a powerful thing? And whenever we start to think about the fact that it's not just going to affect us here, but it will affect us later on down the road, and people don't take that into consideration today. Think about a fruit tree. An apple tree does not reveal itself immediately. At first, it only shows the leaves, the branches, growth. Time passes before fruit appears, and Jesus uses this picture in Matthew chapter 7 verse 16. "Ye shall know them by their fruits." Fruit reveals reality. Eventually, outcomes expose paths. Eventually, choices produce evidence. Eventually, hidden things become visible. That is why wisdom will always ask, what fruit will this create? If I continue down this road, what happens to my family? What happens to my testimony? What happens to my relationship with God, my future? Because consequences often whisper before they shout. Joseph understood this. When temptation drived through Potiphar's wife, Joseph looked beyond the moment. Think about the scene. Nobody seemed to be present. Nobody appeared to be watching. Immediate pleasure stood nearby, yet Joseph saw beyond the now. And listen to the words of Genesis chapter 39, verse 9. "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Notice Joseph evaluated the outcome. He did not merely think what feels good. He thought, what honors God? That perspective protected him. Someone once said, sin takes people farther than what they plan to go, keeps them longer than what they plan to stay, and costs them more than anything they desired to pay. And there's a truth there, because temptation always advertises the benefits, never the consequences. It shows excitement, never heartbreak. Pleasure, never bondage. Immediate gain, never future pain. Wisdom learns to ask, what is this not showing me? Imagine buying a house solely because of a paint color. You walk inside and think, man, the walls are beautiful, the floors are nice, great kitchen. Then later discover the foundation is damaged. There's structural problems, massive issues that are lying underneath the surface. And surface impressions alone can be dangerous. And many people make life decisions this way. They evaluate appearance without examining foundations. Yet, biblical wisdom looks beneath surface level. Colossians chapter 3 verse 2 says, set your affection on things above, not on things of the earth. Why? Because heaven's perspective changes earthly evaluations. When eternity enters into the picture, priorities will shift, measurements will change, and values will adjust. So before major decisions, ask this question: where does this road lead me to? What fruit will this create? Will this strengthen my relationship with Christ? Would I become comfortable inviting God's blessings here? Am I looking only at appearances? Am I ignoring the warning signs? What do godly counselors say? Because outcome matters. Maybe somebody listening right now stands at a crossroads, a relationship decision, a career opportunity, a family matter, a major transition. And perhaps everything outwardly looks perfect. Maybe circumstances seem ideal. Maybe excitement feels overwhelming. Pause long enough to ask, where does this road end? Because roads have destinations, choices have outcomes, and wisdom does not merely examine beginnings, wisdom studies endings too. Because God's way has never simply been about what feels right today. It has always been about what remains right tomorrow, 10 years from now, and in eternity.